The more I look at this case, the JonBenet Ramsey case, sort of like thinking about it, the more I kind of get concerned about not necessarily the initial fallout or mismanagement of what the police may have done. Obviously, that's concerning as well, and you want the best, you want the most accurate and and thorough crime scene investigation that can happen. But mistakes are going to happen. Humans are always going to make mistakes, of course. But the more I look at sort of the surrounding support of the Ramsey camp, the more concerned I am at the clear cult like behavior and just negligent behavior and downright ignorance that I see from people supporting the Ramsey camp. In particular, what I'm meaning is Paula Woodward. I understand supporting somebody, but I also am concerned at people. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you. Let me finish my statement, I guess. Sometimes you try to force things that aren't there. God knows why. You have no reason to do it, but you try to do it anyway. You can't. The saying is, and this is what I was about to say. The saying is, you can't fit a round peg in a square hole. Or some of it may be you can't fit a square peg in a round hole. Correct. But I guess it just depends on how big the or how small the square peg is, I guess. And, if somebody whittles the peg down enough, then maybe you can make it work. I mean, does it fit? I guess it depends on how you define fit. It'll go through, but it's not an exact match. Sometimes, as I've said in other analysis, people just say things to be saying anything. And you're like, did you think about that before you said that? Did you, let's just take a step back and try to think critically for a second about what we're talking about. What would be the implications of what we're saying? What would that mean? And I find that a lot of people just don't really have time. It's not that they're unintelligent. They just don't have time to think critically about certain things. And maybe they don't care. Maybe, there's an element of bias in everyone. And so your bias comes in and you don't think you're biased, but you actually are. And so that kind of clouds your behavior. So I'm going to touch on this interview with Paula Woodward. It was about 4 years ago. And kind of getting a little background to the lead up of the Nashville Crime Con and beyond, to kind of track this thinking around the genetic DNA and what they suspect. And I watched it through just to kind of see what she was talking about, if it was applicable or useful. And again, it's like the Ramsey camp has this desire where the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. I mean, on one hand, you'll say something and you'll walk away from that interaction just having said anything. And then you'll go on to the right hand, on the right hand, you'll just be talking, completely contradicting what you said on the left hand, but just going about your business as if nothing's wrong. And we ask, shouldn't we be a bit cautious here? No. And it shows, like I said before, a pattern of there's no caution in how the Ramseys deal with this investigation. They just bowl over everything. Their strategy, which they showed you in interviews, you see Patsy, is to get vicious and to get brute and to just try to overpower you. And essentially, I'm going to sit down with you, but you better not accuse me of anything, or you better not seem to accuse me of anything, or you better not ask me questions insinuating anything. If you do, then we just going to start kicking up dust. We just going to start going with it, because you ain't going to sit up here and accuse me and this and that. We're about to get offended. How dare you? And they just started trying to force people to believe them. That's why they couldn't stay away from the cameras and the media, because they're trying to force people to believe them. That's why John stays in the news now. He's popping up in front of people all the time. Hey, and he tries to put on the charm. That's what John and Patsy do. They put on the charm in front of people, and they're like, oh, don't you see how much of a nice person I am? Yeah, I never said you weren't nice. I mean, but do we really, are we really fooled into believing that nice people don't commit crimes? I mean, how do you think some of these serial unalivers, sorry if you don't like that word, I'm just doing it for YouTube, but how do you think some of these serial unalivers caught their victims? By being nice. Hey, you want to ride? You don't seem like a bad guy, so yeah, sure, I'll take the ride. For example, there was this guy in the Bay Area. He was like a mechanic or something like that. And it happened years ago, I think in the 70s or something like that, 70s or 80s. And he would see women, walking on the street. And these weren't women who were on the corner or anything. These are women that just, I'm walking. I'm trying to get from one bus to the next or what have you. And this one lady, story started with this one lady where she was, and I'll get to this in just a second. Let me tell this. I'm sorry. But it started where, she's outside and she's, waiting for her boyfriend to come pick her up or something of that sort. And God pulls up in the car. He's like, hey, you look beautiful, or something to that nature. He said, hey, do you need a ride? I could take you to where you're going. I'm going that way anyway. And she kind of looked at him, and he seemed cool. And she trusted him because he looked kind of nerdy, right? So he seemed harmless. And everything is all fun and games. So, and you underestimate nerdy people, per se, until things change in an instant. I tell people all the time, when you're looking at somebody and you're assessing them and you do it so carelessly, things can change in an instant, just like that. And that person who you thought was weak and meaningless or couldn't hurt a fly actually can hurt more than a fly. But now your lack of caution has you in a situation to where you can't do anything but fight for your life. And it's like, just be more cautious about moving forward, just jumping in random cars or talking to random people, because you don't know what people are capable of. They haven't showed you their full hand, so you don't know. And so she jumps in the car with this guy, and he's driving, and then he's driving the wrong way. And she's like, hey, the place I'm going is back that way, so on and so forth. And he's like, yeah, I'm, trying to show you this. So he pulls up to a spot and commences to commit a crime. And he takes pictures of her, and kind of pushes her out the car. Story goes that she goes to a friend's house and she's, losing blood rapidly. She goes to her friend's house. She's knocking on the door and trying to get her friend to say, hey man, this guy pulled out a piece on me, and he used it on me. And when I say piece, I mean, anyways, if you don't know what I mean, don't worry about it. Look it up on Google. But anyways, he pulls out and he kind of, lets it off. And she gets out the car, and like I said, she's losing red liquid, and she goes to her friend's house and knocks on the door, and basically gets her friend to open the door and say, look, take me to the hospital. I need help. And I think she actually lives. Years later, she's walking on a street corner. Guy passes her up and he looks at her and says, do you remember me? Do you know who I am? And she said, no, am I supposed to? And he didn't say anything and he just walks off. Years later, when they're testing, DNA and stuff like that, they thought they did genetic genealogy. They thought it might be him, or they thought it might be somebody. And so they tested and it came back to him. They go find him. This guy was a pillar in the community. Nice things for everyone. So in the daytime, he was doing nice things for everyone, fixing their cars, giving them advice, donating and all such as that. But in the nighttime, he was going out and doing stuff like this with a bunch of women. And he had already unalived, I think, a couple of them, and he had pictures and he had hit them in a wall and that he had plastered over. And so it doesn't matter how nice you are. You can still be doing crazy stuff. And that's why police always say we have to leave every stone unturned. So with that being said, you can't be faked out by what the Ramseys are telling you just because they're trying to force you to think they're nice. You have to look at the evidence and say, man, I understand you're a nice guy. I get that. But I guess I'm a little concerned about this. What is this? Right? Because even nice, intelligent kids can cheat on a test. And you ask them, what happened? Well, just the scenario dictated the issue, right? Sometimes, smart, intelligent kid always aces the test, always does well. But on one test, he cheats on the test and you figure it out and you say, what happened? And once you get him to admit it, he says, well, lately, my mom hasn't been doing well. And so I've been having to take care of her and I just haven't really had time to study. And, I was trying to keep my grades up, trying to go to this college so I can make a lot of money to get a good job and make a lot of money to hopefully take care of my mom as quick as possible. So, I had to do what I had to do. So-and-so offered me an out and I took it, Not a bad person, just the scenario just dictated that things might have to change a little bit. It's not to say that I'm going to use this forever, because that's what people will tell themselves. They'll say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to cheat on tests forever, but just this one time I need to get a pass. And I think you should take that into this case as you consider some of the things being said. So without further ado, sorry for the long spiel. Without further ado, if you've been rocking with me for a long time, you know how I do. So I apologize. Sorry, I'm not sorry. But here we go. Let's look at what Paula is saying.
Welcome back. 25 years later, one of America's biggest mysteries.
Sorry.
Unsolved. All of this time has years later, one of America's biggest mysteries unsolved. All of this time has passed. But now we may be closer to some answers. Police in Colorado say they've been working closely with investigators on new DNA technology in a case that so many have been fascinated by. It is a tragedy, JonBenet Ramsey's death. Paula Woodward was one of the nation's top investigative journalists at the time. She's also an author with a new book called Unsolved, the JonBenet Ramsey murder, 25 years later, and she is joining us live tonight. Paula, we appreciate you coming on. We just ran a story talking about the announcement from police, this DNA sequencing that they're looking into, more specifically investigating genetic genealogy. What does this mean to you?
I think the biggest question I have is, are they going to schedule something? This familial genealogy DNA became widely used in 2016. So they've had 5 years in which to test the remaining DNA. They have the only sample of DNA left. It's small enough that it will only stand up to one test. So why haven't they tested it? Are they going to test it? Are they stalling? Are they sitting on evidence? That's kind of what's been going on with Boulder Police for 25 years.
And what is your theory as to the why now?
I can't figure it out. I don't know. I don't know if it's that they don't want to solve it or what. If the DNA isn't any good, let's go ahead and run it, see if it does match up to somebody. And if not, then go back and look at people from the very beginning. And there were a lot with very difficult backgrounds that they need to look at again if the DNA isn't any good. But for heaven's sakes, run the DNA. You've had 5 years. Please do it and contact the FBI. You need experts.
Take us back to the early stages of this investigation. Some of the criticism that investigators received.
So a couple points here that Paula made later at CrimeCon, I think in 2024 and 2025. They talked about how minuscule the DNA was. And they also talk about this is, she gave you the long and short of what they're upset about here. But then, and this was 4 years ago, but then they get in front of people at CrimeCon in 2024 and they essentially say the same thing and people are clapping like it's new information. It's not. They're clapping like this is just like Paula and John just said something groundbreaking and they didn't. She's telling you the Boulder Police Department don't have a lot of DNA left. I want you to understand, and you guys may know this is not an issue created by the Boulder Police Department. The lack of DNA was an issue created by John and Patsy Ramsey directly. Why do I say that? I say that because when there was on 2 occasions, because when there was an opportunity for the police to continue to pull DNA and hold JonBenet's body, John said it was not a priority. He said the priority was burying JonBenet. And so they fought, wrestled JonBenet out of the hands of the Boulder Police Department. And so the Boulder Police Department said, all right, fine. You want to go bury her? Fine, take her. But we'll stand guard and we'll keep trying to work this case. And so while John and Patsy were out of town, in Atlanta paying their respects, Boulder Police Department, they were continuing to work and follow up. And they were down in Atlanta, knocking on doors, asking John and Patsy, when you guys going to come back? John and Patsy said, we'll be back soon. But first, let me get on television and talk to the world. And it's just like, wait a minute, what's going on here? This is a circus. Now you start to get the picture that this is a bona fide circus. So I think several months later, when they were talking about this, the Boulder Police came back around and they said, hey, look, we might actually, if we want any shot at solving this case, we might actually need to exhume JonBenet's body, meaning you should have never buried her in the first place because we were still trying to understand more about the body. Should have never buried her. But you guys, with these formalities, with these useless, meaningless formalities that don't mean anything, they don't have anything to do with anything. Nobody's forcing you to bury JonBenet. Like if anyways, let me finish my thought. Basically, they said if we want to have any chance at solving this case, we're going to have to exhume the body and try to get more DNA and try to understand more about what happened. Analyze a little bit more. John said, no, that's not a priority. Literally said that this is not a priority. I want my daughter to rest. If somebody, and what I was about to say, if somebody comes up and says, hey, we want to solve this crime as fast as possible on 2 occasions, and your response is, that's not a priority. And they're saying, this is critical evidence gathering that we need. Even if the Boulder Police did make a mistake, they're trying to, at this point, right their wrongs and say, hey, look, we didn't get enough physical evidence from the crime scene. Can you give us the opportunity to do that now? John said no twice. Even with them saying that this might solve the case, this came out of John's mouth. This is what John said on Barbara Walters. He said that they communicated we'd have an opportunity. And John said, that's not a priority to me. The priority is letting my daughter rest. That's who y'all believe. That's who you're lined up to pat on the back. So, John, I never understood. Let me ask you a question. Please come to you and say, we have an opportunity to solve this case. We just need to exhume the body, or we don't need to bury it in the first place. Are you going down when they say, hey, can you come down to the station and give us hair and nail samples and blood samples? Are you going down there and fighting with them and starting a problem with them, saying hey, first and second, hey, I'm gonna give you your samples, and I'm gonna give you your hair samples, but let me state for the record, you are gonna give me my daughter tonight. You're not gonna hold my daughter in here. I am taking my daughter away, and I'm gonna bury her. I don't care what you say. Hey, but Mr. So and so, we need this. Hey, but Miss So and so, we need to this and that. I don't care what you need. You're gonna give me my daughter, and I'm leaving. That would be a little bit over the top now, wouldn't it? And you would want to work with them. I imagine at least 80% of you would want to work with them and say, maybe even more, would want to work. I get this is a logical thing. Well, I want to work to see what happened. Well, tell me more. What? And then maybe you say, you know what? I just want to go ahead and bury them. And you bury them and they say, look, we got to exhume the body. We're asking you to help us understand more. These are 3 occasions when John and Patsy just refused to be helpful to the investigation. When they said, let us sit down and talk to Burke. No. If he had anything to say, he would say it. Hey, we're looking for Burke at Purdue University. What are you doing up there? That's my son. He's a grown man. He can answer for himself. We just want to talk to him. Why are you always in the way? Stopping people from, we can't even, and that's what I'm saying. This investigation was over before it started. They can't even talk to people. And Paula Woodward is coming on here saying, we have a very small amount of DNA. Let's go ahead and test it. And then if that doesn't work, then we go back and test and talk to and re-interview people. I can re-interview people without wasting the DNA. The DNA is a last resort. We don't have any more because of you. Why don't you ask that question when you get to CrimeCon? And as a matter of fact, next CrimeCon, ask John, look, John, it seems to be the case that you actually ruined any opportunity for the Boulder Police Department to collect any more DNA from your daughter by first burying your daughter and then refusing to have her body exhumed. Why did you do that? I think this critically cripples the case. We could have had more DNA. Now we're left to scraping pants, trying to get anything that's left. We have a very small amount of DNA. And the problem here is that over time it degrades, stuff like that. So we got to, they're saying, look, we don't want it to degrade to the point to where it doesn't work. But the fact of the matter is the police keep on saying, and they're not being truthful. See, that's what I'm saying. You get John Ramsey and his camp that only tell you half the story. They only tell you half the truth. The police are saying why are the police not doing that? They keep saying that it's not ready yet. It's not there yet. But why are the police saying that it's not there yet? Have we clarified that? No. But the police are saying it's not there yet because they're scared to degrade their last sample and be stuck for the rest of eternity trying to just re-interview people that have already been re-interviewed. This is a dumb recommendation. Just go out and re-interview people. So what? They can tell them themselves? Why would they do that? Why would they do that? How likely? What's the probability on that? That they would just up and tell them. I mean, it happens in some cases when people know they're dead to rights and the police are basically telling you. They're not asking you, they're telling you. But if we lose this sample, I don't think Paula is taking into account, and maybe she is. Maybe she knows what she's doing. But the fact that you can just carelessly recommend that we use our last bit of DNA, and the police are essentially what the police are probably waiting for is for DNA to come by to where they don't want to get in a situation to where they say, let's use this DNA for genetic DNA testing. Wipes out any DNA that we have left. And then the results come back, didn't work. So that's all I have. I can't give that up so carelessly. That's what the police are saying. John and everybody else who supports him are getting on television acting like they don't know why. And it's very clear why the police are not moving forward, because we don't have much evidence to go off of now. We cannot move forward in good faith, knowing that this is all I have left. If I ruin this, this is bigger than just losing DNA and then just being able to go talk to people. If you get people in court, it's just going to be the he said, she said. And it's like, oh, this witness said they saw you out here, da da da. But it's just going to be, Hal Haddon is going to come up with some story as to why to discredit the witness, and it's going to make them look bad, and the jury is going to believe it, and then you don't have anything physical to tie down to the Ramseys to say that they were there, they did it. So I have to keep this DNA. This is my last resort, my last backup. Now, I bet you, and John was like, we'll raise $1 million. It's not the money. You're misunderstanding what's being said because you're not listening. You don't hear what they're telling you. They're saying, this is all I got. And the fact that this is your last hope, it's like I'm talking to somebody who doesn't care about their daughter's murder. I'm sitting up here telling you, if I do this, I lose any shot at finding, and it doesn't work, I lose any shot at finding the person who did this to your daughter. Do you really want to go through with that? That's just like saying, if we do this surgery and it doesn't work, you may not wake up. You can either choose to live with this ailment. We can manage it with sort of pain medications and stuff like that. We won't be able to get rid of it completely, but we will make you a little bit more comfortable to where you can still kind of get up and walk around every day and so on and so forth. But you'll still be alive. You'll still be breathing. You'll still be functioning. It's just, you might have some slight pain here and there, because if we go in and the surgery is so invasive that you might not wake up. So we're a little bit concerned about that. Could be a loss of too much red fluid. And that's what we're concerned about. Would you be as gung-ho to say, yeah, doc, absolutely, let's keep on going? No, you would go home and you would be cautious. Now, maybe toward the end of your life, you might say, let's see how it works. I'm a little bit older now, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. That's where you might be. But until then, you're like, nah, I'd rather just live my life and kind of see what happens. That's what I'm saying about this case. They're not considering that, John, if, and this is what I'll say about that. Why would somebody be so happy to get rid of the last remaining DNA that we have available? Why would somebody, especially if that's your daughter, who you tell me that you care about so much, why would you be so happy to get rid of the last remaining DNA so fast without thinking about it? Because you know how fast technology changes. If you want to re-interview people, we can do that now. Starting with you. Starting with your son. Starting with your family and everybody else involved. We can go do that right now. And in fact, the Boulder Police Department is doing that. They're re-interviewing people, but we don't have to get rid of the DNA to do it. Now, they set up in CrimeCon in Nashville and acted like the police were just resting on their laurels, being lazy. They keep telling you that the police are being lazy and unwilling to work with John, when really it's a lack of understanding or a lack of willingness to understand exactly the position that the police are in. And instead of trying to work with the police and say, okay, I understand your concern. I wouldn't want that either. I wouldn't want to make sure that I have that to test. Because let's say, even if we don't suspect, let's say we don't suspect the Ramseys did this. Absolutely. But if we get this person in court or whatever, and they're arguing and saying, you know what, we don't believe the DNA test, find another method to test. You have to have a robustness check to test, to confirm these findings. If you get a robustness check, we'll believe you. Well, we can't do that because we spent all the money on genetic testing. Or I'm sorry, not the money. We spent all of the rest of our DNA on genetic testing. So now we don't have any more. I guarantee you, ask the police now. Ask them if there was a non-invasive method that didn't touch the DNA, that allowed you to get an understanding of the DNA without touching it, would you do it? They'd probably say yes. Absolutely. As long as it doesn't completely, we want to make certain that it doesn't touch the DNA at all so that we can keep this. Try as many methods as you want. See if we can clone the DNA. If we can clone the DNA and get some good structuring from that to where it gives us a hint of, okay, we're at 99% confidence level based on these. Like if you know what would be cool? If we could create, sometimes they create in testing for, at least for economics, they create what's called synthetic data, right? And it's sort of like proxy data to sort of simulate a real world scenario based on actual data. It's there to simulate, to give us the idea without having to run an actual test. Like, say, for example, if you're doing something that, may not, or may be frowned upon in a way that it's not necessarily unethical, but it's just like, this might take high human capital, right? Something like that. You might take a lot of people or something, whatever. And I may not be explaining it right, but I'm running a test to where we have these people taking this pill and we have these people taking this pill. We might not want to test this medicine just on people, just completely. Obviously, you have people sign waivers and forms, but we might not want to just completely test this on people. And people do. There are tests where people put their bodies on the line to where they say, yes, this could happen to me. But we might say we don't want to go full throttle on that. We just want to get a sort of baseline understanding whether or not this scenario might exist, right? Or kind of like maybe a better example is like, what would happen if this were the case, right? So maybe you might say, you have people who are going to the doctor. Are they healthier than people who don't go to the doctor? And so you would kind of say, well, we don't know if they're healthier or not because we don't know people going to the doctor versus people who don't go to the doctor, because people who don't go to the doctor, we don't know how healthy they are or not because they didn't go to the doctor. They can only tell you how healthy they think they are. Right? And so we might create a synthetic group to say, well, what would be the case if you did? What's your average health now? What would be the case if you did? So we create a synthetic group to kind of say, this would be the case if they did, to try to get sort of like a proxy baseline outcome to test who would be healthier in those scenarios, so we can sort of isolate the causal mechanism of what's making people healthy. Is it hospitals that are making people healthy, or are people just healthy, just, on average by nature? And maybe hospitals are over exaggerating how beneficial they are, right, to people's health. That's what we're trying to understand more about. And so the same thing in this case, can we do some sort of synthetic testing to sort of derive, the alleles of some sort, or the information, extract the information and clone it and say, look, this is what the DNA looks like. Under testing, this is what the structure would look like. Now, let's test that with the genetic profile or the whole genome sequencing and see what we come up with. Can we get a positive failsafe to where we feel comfortable enough? Can we find somebody and say, looks like we found someone? And then then that would be that would be the genetic testing side. Then we can go with whole genome sequencing and test and say, okay, this is the whole genome sequencing side. This is what we come up with. Do these match Do they not match? Do we need to go back to the drawing board? That's what we need to look at. But ain't nobody's going that deep. This was, you see what I'm saying? And let's come up, instead of raising $1 million instead of raising $1 million to exhaust the final drop of our data and being so happy and ready to do that, let's try to see if we can't push technology in a way that where we can clone that and then try to test that and say this DNA would behave like this under this testing, and kind of see first. Let's be cautious there. But I'm concerned because I'm a little concerned because there are certain elements of this case that you wonder, why are you not hesitant to move forward with certain things? There was something when as I was studying this case, and I can't remember right offhand, but there was an element of this case to where I had this exact feeling, this exact thought of, I'm telling you that this would deplete our DNA resources and we wouldn't have anything else, and you're happy to do it. That would mean that your daughter's case could never be solved. Why are you happy about that? And you're now gloating and saying, "Oh, let's take them to court. We'll school them." I'm sorry, I misunderstand your target here. Is your target or your end goal to school the Boulder Police Department, or is your target end goal to solve this case for your daughter's death? Because I'm confused as to why we're trying to showboat about our legal prowess and our ability to school you in court. I'm confused because we're here to talk about JonBenet and how that happened. I'm lost as to how this benefits JonBenet, because it seems like everything that was a benefit to JonBenet has fallen through the cracks. I don't know. For one who is on the outside looking in, it almost seemed as if you don't want the case to be solved. It's what it almost seems like when you make decisions like this. And it's like you're running through things very quickly. And I don't understand why. I'm trying to figure that out. I'm trying to place it. And nobody is saying, hey, let's stop for a moment and consider what's happening. Nobody's doing that. What's going on here? Let me know what you think in the comments. Like, share, subscribe. Appreciate you if you're doing all those things, and appreciate you being here. Make sure you're taking care of yourself. And until next time, take it easy.